I stared at the job application on my computer screen, the words blurring together as frustration bubbled in my chest. It had been over a year since I left my previous job, a job I had poured everything into, only to have it end in a shouting match with a boss who didn't respect me. I walked out of that office with my head held high, convinced I'd find something better. But as the months stretched on, my confidence shrank to nothing. Mia, my wife, had been nothing but supportive at first. "You'll bounce back," she said with a reassuring smile every morning as she left for work. She always believed in me, until she didn't. I noticed the way her smiles became thinner, her words less encouraging. She didn't say it outright, but I could tell she was getting tired of carrying the weight of everything while I spiraled. Our roles had reversed in a way I never expected. Mia was now the breadwinner, working long hours at her corporate job while I stayed home, pretending to be productive. I'd start the day optimistic, making lists of job postings and updating my resume, but by mid-afternoon, I'd be on the couch, lost in another rerun of a show I'd seen 100 times. The rejections chipped away at me. Each unanswered application felt like another brick added to the wall between us. I tried to contribute where I could, fixing things around the house, cooking dinner, keeping the place clean, but no amount of perfectly folded laundry or vacuumed floors could mask the growing tension. Mia would come home exhausted, and while she'd always thank me for dinner, the sparkle in her eyes was gone. I couldn't blame her. I didn't feel like the man she married anymore. One night, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, the silence between us was louder than the clinking of our forks against the plates. "How was work?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Busy," she replied curtly, not looking up from her food. I hated that word. It was the word she always used when she didn't want to talk about work, about us, about anything. "I'm working on a lead," I said, trying to sound upbeat. "There's a company downtown that's looking for project managers. I think I'm a good fit." "That's great, Jason," she said, but her tone was flat. She didn't believe me. And honestly, I didn't believe myself either. The truth was, I had been applying half-heartedly, afraid of another rejection. It was easier to live in the limbo of "I'm trying" than to face the possibility that I might not measure up. Mia, on the other hand, was holding everything together, paying the bills, managing our social obligations, and still trying to be a supportive partner. I knew I was letting her down, but I didn't know how to fix it. The turning point came one evening when Mia came home later than usual. She dropped her bag on the couch and sighed, her shoulders slumping under the weight of the day. "We need to talk," she said, her voice softer than I expected. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What's wrong?" "It's not just today, Jason. It's every day. I feel like I'm carrying everything alone. I'm tired. I'm trying," I said, my voice defensive. "It's not like I'm just sitting around doing nothing." "Are you?" she shot back, and the sharpness of her tone cut through me. "Because sometimes it feels like you've given up." Her words stung, not because they were unfair, but because they were true. I had given up, in ways I didn't even realize until she said it out loud. The conversation ended in silence, with Mia retreating to the bedroom and me sitting alone in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen. I hated that I had become this version of myself, passive, defeated, and dependent. But I didn't know how to climb out of the hole I had dug. As I lay awake that night, listening to Mia's quiet breathing beside me, I made a silent promise to myself. I would find a way to fix this. I didn't know how yet, but I couldn't let this be the story of our marriage. I wanted to believe things were turning around. After that difficult conversation with Mia, I resolved to get back on track. I started waking up earlier, determined to make a change. Job boards became my daily routine, and I even started applying for positions I wasn't entirely qualified for, hoping maybe one would stick. When nothing came through, I decided to try part-time gigs, just to show Mia I was putting in the effort. The first was a delivery job. It was straightforward enough. Pick up the packages, drop them off, and move on to the next stop. But the constant rush hour traffic and an overbearing supervisor made it unbearable. After 2 weeks, I quit. They were completely disorganized. I told Mia that evening as I stirred the pot of pasta on the stove. She gave me a small nod, her lips pressed tight, but she didn't say much. That hurt more than if she had argued. Next came a retail job at a local hardware store. It wasn't glamorous, but I figured it would do until I found something better. The manager was condescending, constantly barking orders and treating me like I didn't know a wrench from a screwdriver. After 3 shifts, I walked out. It just wasn't a good fit, I explained to Mia. She barely looked up from her laptop, muttering, "Okay." Her lack of reaction gnawed at me. I knew she was disappointed, but I couldn't admit that to myself, let alone to her. I told myself it was fine, temporary setbacks on the path to something bigger. But deep down, I knew I was avoiding the real problem. I didn't want to settle for anything less than the career I thought I deserved, even if it meant dragging out this rut. The lies started small. When Mia's parents asked how things were going, I plastered on a confident smile and said I was planning to launch my own business soon. "I've got a solid concept," I told them, though I had no idea what that concept was. The words just tumbled out, and to my surprise, they seemed impressed. "That's great, Jason," her dad said, clapping me on the shoulder. I felt a flicker of pride, even if it was built on a foundation of fiction. Mia overheard that conversation and didn't say anything at first. But later that night, as we got ready for bed, she asked, "Why did you tell them you're starting a business?" I shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "I just didn't want them to think I'm not trying," she sighed, pulling back the covers. "You don't have to lie to them, Jason. It's okay to be honest." "Is it?" I snapped, the frustration spilling out. "Because it doesn't feel like anyone thinks it's okay for me to be struggling." She looked at me then, her expression soft but weary. "I do, Jason. But you have to want to move forward. You can't just keep spinning in circles." Her words stayed with me, echoing in my mind as I tossed and turned that night. She wasn't wrong. But how could I move forward when every step felt like quicksand? The tipping point came when I caught myself sneaking a $20 bill from her wallet one afternoon. It wasn't much, just enough for a couple of beers with a buddy, but the guilt hit me like a freight train. I justified it in my head. After all, we shared finances, right? But when Mia asked later, "Did you take money from my wallet?" I froze. I wanted to lie, to brush it off, but the look on her face stopped me. "Yeah," I admitted, trying to keep my tone casual. "I just needed a little for some drinks." Her disappointment was palpable. "Jason, that's not okay," she said quietly. "If you needed money, why didn't you just ask me?" "I didn't think it was a big deal," I muttered. But the truth was, I didn't want to admit I had nothing of my own. She stared at me for a long moment before shaking her head and walking away. That night, the silence between us was deafening. I told myself I'd make it up to her, that I'd find a way to be the man she needed again. But the truth was, I didn't know how. I was trapped in a cycle of false starts and empty promises, and Mia's patience, once boundless, was wearing dangerously thin. I had convinced myself that I wasn't the problem. Mia, with her constant sighs and thinly veiled frustration, was just under too much pressure. "She'll come around," I told myself. But deep down, I knew I was wrong. I just didn't want to face it. The day she caught me taking money from her wallet was the beginning of a shift I couldn't ignore. It wasn't the amount that mattered. It was the principle. I had crossed a line, and we both knew it. But instead of stepping up and addressing the growing tension between us, I found ways to justify my behavior. "It's just a small thing," I thought. "I'll pay her back when I get back on my feet." The problem was, I wasn't even trying to get back on my feet anymore. Mia's disappointment became a constant presence in the house. It was there in the way she barely looked at me during dinner, the way she went to bed earlier just to avoid our awkward conversations, the way she lingered at work longer than necessary. I told myself she was overreacting, that I wasn't as bad as she made me out to be. But her actions told a story I couldn't ignore. I was losing her. Then came the credit card incident. I had been scrolling through social media one afternoon, feeling particularly useless, when I came across an ad for luxury vacations. Paris, the Eiffel Tower, romantic cobblestone streets. It sparked an idea, a desperate, foolish idea. I would take Mia's platinum credit card and surprise my parents with a grand gesture. A trip to France. A way to prove to them, and to myself, that I wasn't a complete failure. Without thinking it through, I grabbed her card and booked the flights. "This will show everyone I'm serious," I thought. I just need a win. But I didn't tell Mia. How could I? I knew she wouldn't approve, and I didn't want to hear her lecture me about finances again. I'd figure it out later, I told myself. Somehow, the fallout came fast and hard. Later that day, Mia called me, her voice tight with barely contained anger. Jason, did you take my credit card? I hesitated, but there was no point lying. Yeah, but it's for a good reason. I'm taking my parents on a trip to France. They deserve it, and I figured it would be a nice gesture. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Jason, she said finally, her voice ice cold, that card expired last month. It's deactivated. The words hit me like a freight train. I hadn't even checked. My grand gesture, my brilliant plan, had been doomed from the start. I stammered, trying to come up with an explanation, but Mia wasn't having it. You lied to me. You lied to them. And now you've put me in a position I didn't ask to be in, she said. Her words cut deep, and I felt the weight of my actions pressing down on me. I had no choice but to tell my parents the truth. The call was excruciating. My mom's voice was full of disappointment, my dad's tone sharp with disapproval. Why would you do something like this, Jason? He asked. I didn't have a good answer. I stammered out an apology and hung up, feeling smaller than I ever had before. When Mia came home that evening, the tension was unbearable. She didn't yell or scream. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes said everything. You've crossed a line, Jason, she said quietly. I don't even know who you are anymore. Her words echoed in my head long after she had gone to bed. She was right. I didn't know who I was anymore either. I had become someone who made excuses, someone who avoided responsibility, someone who took from the person who had given me everything. And for what? A delusional attempt to prove something to myself and others. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if there was any way to fix what I had broken. Mia deserved better than this version of me. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I could be the man she needed anymore. And I wasn't sure if she even wanted me to try. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Mia banging around in the kitchen. Her movements were sharp and deliberate. No warm good morning or casual, want some coffee? This wasn't just anger. This was disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than any shouting match. I hesitated before stepping into the kitchen, trying to brace myself for whatever was coming. Morning, I mumbled, hoping to soften the mood. She didn't look up from the sink. We need to talk, she said, her tone flat but firm. That was when I knew I wasn't going to be able to charm or deflect my way out of this one. I sat down at the table, my stomach churning. She turned off the water and finally faced me, her arms crossed. Jason, she began, what were you thinking taking my credit card without asking? I started to explain, but she cut me off. No, seriously, did you think I wouldn't notice? Or were you just hoping I wouldn't care? It wasn't like that, I said quickly, though even I wasn't sure what that was. I just wanted to do something for my parents. They've been so supportive, and I thought. You thought you could use my money to play the hero? She snapped, her voice rising. Jason, do you even hear yourself? You didn't just take my card. You lied to your parents. You made promises you couldn't keep, and now I'm the one who has to clean up your mess. Her words hit me like a slap. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the truth was staring me in the face. She was right. I had taken her for granted, using her stability to prop up my crumbling ego. And now, I had dragged her into a situation she didn't ask for. I messed up, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to feel like I was doing something good for once. I didn't think it through. No, you didn't, she said, her tone softening but only slightly. And now we're here. Again. The weight of her words settled on my chest. This wasn't the first time I had let her down, and we both knew it wouldn't be the last unless something changed. The problem was, I didn't know how to change. I felt stuck in a cycle of bad decisions and misplaced intentions, each one pulling me further away from the man I used to be. That night, I lay awake replaying the conversation in my head. Mia's disappointment was palpable, and for the first time, I wondered if she was reaching her breaking point. She hadn't said it outright, but I could feel it in the way she avoided my gaze, in the sharpness of her words. She was tired, tired of carrying me, tired of cleaning up my messes, tired of waiting for me to grow up. The next day, Mia came home from work late. She looked exhausted, but I could tell she was trying to hold it together. I called my parents, I said as she set her bag down. I told them everything. About the card, about the trip. Her eyes flickered with surprise. And they're disappointed, I admitted. But they said they'll pay for the trip themselves. I'll figure out a way to pay them back. She nodded, her expression unreadable. Good. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, she said, Jason, I can't keep doing this. My heart sank. Doing what? Cleaning up your messes. Pretending it's going to get better when nothing changes. She sighed and sat down across from me, her shoulders slumping. I love you, but I'm starting to feel like that's not enough anymore. Her words cut deeper than anything she had ever said before. I wanted to promise her that things would change, that I would change, but I didn't know how. All I could do was sit there, feeling the weight of her disappointment and the slow realization that I was on the verge of losing her. Mia went to bed early that night, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The house felt emptier than ever, and for the first time, I began to wonder if she was already imagining a life without me in it. The morning after our conversation, I woke up to the sound of Mia on the phone. Her voice was soft but deliberate, the kind of tone she used when she didn't want to be overheard. I sat up, listening to the muffled words drifting from the kitchen. I didn't catch much, but one phrase stood out like a blaring alarm. I can't keep doing this. I knew she wasn't talking to me. When she hung up and walked back into the bedroom, her eyes barely met mine. She didn't say anything, just grabbed her bag and keys. I'll be home late, she said without looking back as she closed the door behind her. The silence in the house felt oppressive. For the first time, I let myself consider the possibility that Mia might be done. Truly done. And the thought terrified me. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mia's mom, Linda. We need to talk. My stomach dropped. Linda was always kind, but she didn't mince words. If she wanted to talk, it wasn't about something trivial. I met Linda and Robert, Mia's parents, at their house later that day. The look on Linda's face as she opened the door said it all. Sympathy mixed with disappointment. Robert, always more reserved, just nodded curtly as I stepped inside. We know what's been going on, Jason, Linda began as we sat in the living room. Mia told us everything about the credit card and the trip. I braced myself for the lecture, but to my surprise, her tone softened. Jason, we've always cared about you. You're part of this family. But this can't go on. You're dragging her down. The words stung more than I expected. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, I said weakly. I'm just trying to figure things out. Robert finally spoke, his voice firm but calm. Jason, you've had over a year to figure things out. At some point, you have to stop making excuses. Mia's exhausted and frankly, so are we. I sat there, swallowing the lump in my throat. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I wasn't as lost as they thought, but deep down, I knew they were right. I had been spinning my wheels for months, hoping something would magically fix itself. And in the process, I had let Mia carry the weight of everything. Linda leaned forward, her expression softening. She loves you, Jason. She's fought for this marriage more than most people would. But she can't do it alone anymore. You need to decide if you're going to step up or let her go. The conversation played in my mind all the way home. By the time I walked through the door, Mia was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes betrayed a weariness I had never seen before. We need to talk, she said, echoing Linda's words from earlier. I sat down across from her, my heart pounding. Okay. I can't keep pretending everything's fine, she began. I've been holding this together for as long as I can, but I'm at my breaking point, Jason. I need a partner, not another responsibility. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Mia, I know I've messed up. I'm trying to fix things. Are you? She interrupted, her voice sharp but not unkind. Because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like you're just waiting for me to fix it for you. I didn't know what to say. She was right. I had been waiting. For what? I didn't even know. A miracle? A second chance I hadn't earned? She sighed, her shoulders slumping. I talked to my parents, she said. I told them I'm thinking about leaving. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. You're leaving? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to, she said, tears brimming in her eyes. But I can't keep sacrificing my sanity and happiness for someone who won't meet me halfway. I wanted to beg her to stay, to promise her I would change, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I could. The weight of my failures felt insurmountable, and for the first time, I realized just how much I had taken her for granted. She stood up, wiping her eyes. I need time to think. And so do you. As the door closed behind her, I sat there in the empty house, finally facing the reality I had been avoiding for so long. If I didn't change, I was going to lose everything. The silence in the house was deafening after Mia walked out. Days turned into weeks, and each passing moment felt like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff. I tried to act normal, as though everything was fine, but inside, I was unraveling. Then the call came. It was Linda, Mia's mom. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that set my heart racing. Jason, Mia has made her decision. She's filing for divorce. The word hit me like a freight train. Divorce. I had feared this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Linda continued, her voice firm but sympathetic. She's already spoken to her lawyer. She asked me to tell you because, well, she thought it might be easier coming from me. Easier? Nothing about this felt easy. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. Did she say why? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She's tired, Jason, Linda said softly. She's given this everything she has, but she can't keep sacrificing her happiness. You need to accept that. I hung up without saying much more. What could I say? The woman I loved was done with me, and I had no one to blame but myself. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, replaying every argument, every missed opportunity to fix things. By the time Mia came home that evening, the weight of everything felt unbearable. I decided to confront her, even though I wasn't sure what I hoped to achieve. She was sitting on the couch when I walked in, her posture stiff, her eyes tired. Linda told me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mia nodded. I thought it would be easier that way. Easier for who? I snapped, unable to hide the bitterness in my tone. You don't even have the decency to tell me yourself? Her eyes flared with anger, but she quickly composed herself. Jason, this isn't about decency. It's about survival, for both of us. We can't keep living like this. Living like what? I demanded, my voice rising. Like a couple that's supposed to work through things? Like people who made vows to each other? Mia stood up, her expression unreadable. Jason, those vows go both ways. I've been carrying this marriage on my back for years while you've been coasting. I gave you every chance to meet me halfway, and you didn't. Her words stung, but I couldn't argue with them. She was right. I had coasted. I had taken her love and support for granted, and now I was paying the price. So that's it? I asked, my voice breaking. You're just giving up on us? She sighed, her shoulders slumping. I'm not giving up. I'm letting go. There's a difference. The silence that followed was suffocating. I wanted to scream, to beg her to stay, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. She had made up her mind, and there was no turning back. Over the next few days, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Mia started packing her things, moving out little by little. Every empty space in the house felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of everything I had lost. I tried reaching out to her a few times, sending long, rambling texts about how I was going to change, how I would do whatever it took to fix things. But she didn't respond. She had drawn a line, and she wasn't going to cross it again. One evening, I saw her car pull into the driveway. She came inside, looking as composed as ever, but there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I brought the divorce papers, she said, placing a folder on the kitchen counter. You don't have to sign them right away, but I thought it would be easier if I handled everything. I nodded, unable to find the words. She lingered for a moment, as though she was waiting for me to say something. But what was there to say? She had made her decision, and I had no choice but to accept it. Before she left, She turned to me one last time. Jason, I hope you figure things out. For yourself. For your future. You deserve to be happy. You just need to stop standing in your own way. And with that, she was gone. I stared at the divorce papers for hours that night, unable to bring myself to open them. The weight of my failures felt crushing, but beneath the regret, a small flicker of something else began to stir. Resolve. If I couldn't save my marriage, maybe I could at least save myself. The house felt impossibly empty without Mia. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered in the bedroom, and every corner of the house seemed to mock me with memories of what once was. I spent my nights replaying our last conversation, wishing I had said something, anything, to make her stay. But deep down, I knew the time for words had passed. One afternoon, I received a text from Linda. Jason, he's coming back to the house. Be ready. I knew she meant Mia was sending her lawyer to retrieve the last of her belongings. But when the doorbell rang, it wasn't her lawyer standing there. It was Mia. She looked tired, her face a mix of determination and sorrow. I thought it would be better if I came to pick up the rest of my things, she said softly, stepping into the house she had once called home. She glanced around, her eyes lingering on the photos we had yet to take down from the walls. I nodded, unable to muster a proper response. Watching her move through the house, boxing up her belongings, was surreal. It felt like the final nails were being hammered into the coffin of our marriage. As she packed the last of her things into her car, I found the courage to speak. Mia, I started, my voice hesitant. Can we talk for a moment? She paused, setting down the box she was holding. Okay, she said, leaning against the car. I took a deep breath, the words catching in my throat. I want to say I'm sorry. For everything. For taking you for granted. For not being the man you needed me to be. I know I can't change what happened, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Jason, I know you're sorry, and I believe you want to change. But I've given you so many chances, and every time, it was the same story. I can't keep sacrificing myself, hoping this time will be different. Her words cut deep, but I couldn't argue. She was right. I had squandered every chance she had given me, and now I was paying the price. I understand, I said quietly. I wish things could have been different. So do I, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But wishing doesn't change anything. We both need to move forward. I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me like a heavy blanket. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She gave me a sad smile. I hope you do too. With that, she climbed into her car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the driveway. The finality of her departure hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of the life I had envisioned for us. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, the silence of the house almost deafening. I found myself walking through the rooms, touching the things she had left behind. A forgotten hair clip on the bathroom counter, a pair of slippers tucked under the bed. Each item felt like a ghost of the life we had shared. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the divorce papers on the coffee table. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling as I signed my name. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew it was the right thing to do. This was my final goodbye to Mia, to the man I had been, and to the life we had built together. It was painful, but it was also necessary. I couldn't move forward until I let go of the past. As I sat there, the weight of everything finally sinking in, I made a silent promise to myself. I would take this pain and use it to grow. I would rebuild my life, not for Mia or anyone else, but for me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a small flicker of hope. The divorce process was as draining as I had feared. Every document I signed, every meeting with the lawyer, and every court appearance felt like I was dismantling the life Mia and I had built, brick by brick. It wasn't just about paperwork. It was about acknowledging that the person I had once promised forever to was no longer a part of my future. The first court hearing was uneventful but heavy with tension. Mia and I barely looked at each other as our lawyers spoke on our behalf. She sat across the room, poised and composed, while I tried to keep my emotions in check. Part of me wanted to reach across the divide and beg her to come back, but the rational part of me knew it wouldn't change anything. After the hearing, I caught a glimpse of her in the hallway. She was talking to her lawyer, her face a mix of determination and sadness. For a moment, our eyes met, and I could see the pain she was trying so hard to hide. It wasn't easy for her either, but that didn't make it hurt any less. The next few weeks were a blur of negotiations and compromises. Mia and I didn't have much in the way of assets, no shared business ventures or sprawling estates, but the emotional weight of dividing our belongings was crushing. Every decision felt like a reminder of what we had lost. "Who gets the couch?" the mediator asked during one session. It seemed like such a trivial question, but it was one of dozens that needed answers. "Mia can have it," I said quickly, not wanting to prolong the discussion. I didn't care about the couch or the dishes or the framed pictures on the walls. I just wanted it to be over. But there was one thing I refused to let go of: the small houseplant Mia had given me on our first anniversary. It had sat on my desk for years, a quiet reminder of the love we had shared in the early days. "I want to keep that," I told the mediator, my voice firm. Mia looked surprised but didn't argue. "That's fine," she said softly. It was one of the few moments during the process where we seemed to find common ground, however fleeting. As the negotiations continued, I found myself reflecting on how much I had sacrificed during our marriage. I had given so much of myself, my time, my energy, my dreams, trying to build a life that would make Mia happy. And now, as we divided everything down to the last fork and spoon, I realized how little I had left for myself. The final meeting was bittersweet. Our lawyers reviewed the agreement one last time, and we both signed the papers that officially ended our marriage. Mia looked at me as she slid the final document across the table. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said quietly. "You too," I replied, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. Walking out of the courthouse that day felt like stepping into a new world. The weight of the marriage was gone, but so was the security it had provided. I was untethered, floating in a sea of uncertainty. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a chance to redefine myself. I threw myself into my work, using the long hours to distract myself from the emptiness at home. I started going to the gym, not just to get in shape, but to channel my frustration into something productive. And slowly, I began to rebuild the parts of myself that had been chipped away over the years. Mia reached out a few times in the weeks after the divorce was finalized, sending polite messages about logistics, mail that needed forwarding, a box she had forgotten to pack. I answered each one civilly, but kept my responses short. I needed distance to heal, and I knew she did too. Linda called me one evening to check in. "How are you holding up?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I'm getting there," I finally said. And it was the truth. The pain hadn't gone away, but it was starting to feel less like a gaping wound and more like a scar I could live with. As I sat on the couch that night, looking at the houseplant on the coffee table, I realized something important. The divorce wasn't the end of my story. It was the end of a chapter, yes, but it was also the beginning of something new. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to turn the page. The months after the divorce were a mix of bittersweet realizations and cautious optimism. I had spent so long feeling trapped in a relationship that drained me, and now, with the weight lifted, I felt both liberated and uncertain. The world seemed bigger and emptier all at once, but there was also potential for something better. The first thing I did was reclaim my space. The house, once filled with reminders of Mia, was slowly transformed into something that reflected me. I replaced the shared photos with artwork I had picked up over the years but never displayed. I moved the furniture around, painted the walls a warm, welcoming color, and got rid of the couch Mia loved but I always hated. It was therapeutic, a way of physically marking the start of my new life. I reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. During the marriage, I had pulled away from people without even realizing it, focusing all my energy on keeping things afloat with Mia. Now, I reached out to those I had drifted from, and to my surprise, they welcomed me back with open arms. Game nights, casual dinners, and long phone calls became a regular part of my life again, filling the void that the divorce had left behind. One of the most surprising changes was how much I enjoyed being on my own. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about pleasing someone else or walking on eggshells to avoid conflict. I could come home from work, put on music I liked, and cook dinner without worrying if it met someone else's expectations. It was freeing in a way I hadn't anticipated. One evening, Linda called to check in. I appreciated her concern, but I was careful to keep the conversation focused on the present. "I'm proud of you," she said near the end of the call. "You've come a long way." Her words meant a lot, but I knew I still had more work to do. Dating was the last thing on my mind at first. I needed time to heal and figure out who I was outside of the marriage. But life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. At a community event, I met someone, Claire. She was warm, intelligent, and easy to talk to, with a laugh that lit up the room. We started as friends, bonding over shared interests and mutual stories of resilience. There was no pressure, no rush, just two people enjoying each other's company. Claire reminded me of what it felt like to be seen and valued. She wasn't looking to fix me or change me. She liked me for who I was, flaws and all. It was a stark contrast to how I had felt with Mia toward the end, where every interaction seemed to chip away at my self-worth. With Claire, I felt whole again. Emily and Lucas were thriving too. They had adjusted to the new normal far better than I had expected. Therapy sessions helped them process the changes, and I made it a point to be as present as possible in their lives. Whether it was helping with homework, cheering them on at soccer games, or just spending quiet evenings watching movies, I poured my energy into making sure they felt loved and secure. Mia reached out a few times, usually with practical questions about paperwork or logistics. But there was a different tone to her messages now, less entitled, more subdued. Once, she even apologized for everything, saying she had realized how much she had taken me for granted. I appreciated the sentiment, but I didn't respond. I had moved on, and I wasn't interested in reopening old wounds. One day, as I was cleaning out a closet, I came across a box of things from the early days of my marriage to Mia. Old photos, letters, souvenirs from trips we had taken together. I sat on the floor and went through it all, letting myself feel the sadness and nostalgia, but also recognizing how far I had come. I didn't hate Mia anymore. In fact, I wished her well. But I was grateful the chapter of my life with her was over. That evening, I sat on the patio of my small but cozy new home, watching the sunset with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Claire texted me, asking about our plans for the weekend, and Emily and Lucas were inside, laughing as they played a video game. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. The past had shaped me, but it didn't define me. I was ready to embrace the future, whatever it held. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, hope. They all swirled together in a strange cocktail. It wasn't the ending I had envisioned when Mia and I first said our vows, but it was the ending we needed. As I walked out of the courthouse, the weight of the past few years seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Life after the divorce wasn't a fairy tale transformation. It was a slow, steady climb. At first, there were moments of doubt and loneliness, but with each passing day, I found myself settling into a rhythm. I poured my energy into creating a life that felt authentic and fulfilling, one that wasn't defined by compromise or constant tension. One of the most significant changes was how I viewed myself. For years, I had let my worth be tied to my role in the marriage, measuring my success by how much I could provide or how well I could keep things together. But now, I was learning to see myself as an individual again, with dreams, goals, and value that didn't depend on someone else's approval. Emily and Lucas were a huge part of that journey. They had been through so much, and I made it my mission to give them the stability and love they deserved. We developed new traditions, Friday night pizza and movie marathons, weekend hikes, and even impromptu dance-offs in the living room. Their laughter became my anchor, a reminder that even in the midst of change, joy was still possible. Professionally, things were looking up too. I had thrown myself into my career as a way to cope during the tough times, and that hard work was finally paying off. I landed a promotion that gave me more financial security and the flexibility to be present for my kids. It was a reminder that even when life feels like it's falling apart, there's always a chance to rebuild. Mia, on the other hand, seemed to be struggling. I heard through mutual acquaintances that her attempts to piece her life back together hadn't gone as planned. Her career had stagnated, and her social circle had dwindled. Once, she sent me a long email apologizing for everything and asking if we could talk. I read it carefully, appreciating her acknowledgement of her mistakes, but I didn't reply. I had moved on, and I wasn't willing to reopen that door. Claire became a bright spot in my life. What started as a friendship had grown into something more, and her presence brought a sense of calm and support I hadn't realized I was missing. She never tried to fill a void or compete with the past. She was simply there, steady and kind, offering me a glimpse of what a healthy partnership could look like. One evening, as we sat on the patio after dinner, Claire turned to me with a gentle smile. "You've come so far, you know? I hope you're proud of yourself." Her words stayed with me. I was proud, not just of how far I had come, but of the person I was becoming. The divorce had been a painful chapter, but it had also been a catalyst for growth. It forced me to confront hard truths, to reevaluate my priorities, and to learn the value of self-respect. The kids were thriving too. Emily had joined the school's theater club, and Lucas was excelling in soccer. Seeing them happy and confident reaffirmed that I had made the right choices, even when they were difficult. We had weathered the storm together, and now we were stronger for it. The final piece of closure came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was organizing old files when I came across a box of keepsakes from my marriage to Mia. Wedding photos, anniversary cards, souvenirs from trips. For a moment, I considered tossing it all, but instead, I decided to keep it, tucking it away in the attic. It wasn't about holding on to the past. It was about acknowledging it and letting it rest where it belonged. As the sun set that evening, I stood on the balcony of my new home, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. Emily and Lucas were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Claire joined me, wrapping her arms around me as we looked out at the view. This is it, I thought. This is what moving forward feels like. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had built a new life, one filled with love, resilience, and hope. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future.